My background is a clinical psychologist. I was trained around this whole idea that if we're going to work with people, then we need to sort of spend time figuring out and really examining the context of the problem they're presenting with. And then we'll go to DSM, which is that diagnostic statistical manual, and we'll figure out what the category is they fall into. And we check all these different symptoms off. And I say it jokingly, but when I was examining DSM for the first time, I kind of went through it and thought that I might have had four major disorders. And so what I kind of came away with out of my education is that everybody has challenges, some more significant than others, but that the idea that we start with what's wrong with people can be fraught with danger, because there's a tendency then for people to see themselves that way. They look through the lens and say, I've got a problem. And they kind of interpret the world and themselves around that way. I actually believe that people are actually quite amazing, and they do have strengths. And if we connect with them the right way, they have a tendency then to open up and really talk about what's going on in their lives. And that we can actually sort of in those conversations also identify strengths that they have. Because if we only look at what's wrong with people, then we have a narrow focus. We're only zeroing in on a particular part of their life, and yet they have a whole other aspect of their life that can, if understood properly, facilitate positive change. So it's not that I'm all messed up. It's that I'm just wrestling with maybe particular issues, but I'm also experiencing success in other areas of my life. And so I moved away from that more narrow perspective to a more holistic approach of how we see people and how we invite change. Oftentimes it's referred to as a strength-based approach or positive psychology. Most people, when they experience maybe a challenge or something that they're trying to navigate, they don't need to be with an expert. What they need to be is with somebody who knows how to listen, who knows how to listen to understand and act as a sounding board, help them to maybe explore other alternatives to reframe their circumstances so that they can, with confidence, step out of their comfort zone and try different things or take the smart risks that they need to take, or to have a way to kind of balance the pros and cons of their current decisions. And that kind of has led me to that whole realm of coaching. I've always been intrigued with coaching. It's probably one of the fastest growing industries in North America right now. Although it's a great industry to be in, we also need to know that we're actually touching base with people in their story, their evolving story of who they are, what they consider to be important. And it's a privilege, but it holds a great deal of responsibility. And so at the end of the day, if I'm working with somebody and they walk away thinking less of themselves than they should, then I haven't done my job. As opposed to, do I engage a person from a perspective that enhances their understanding of things can be different for me? Do I feel hopeful and optimistic? Do I have a deeper understanding that actually I'm a person of value, and that as I evolve my story forward, that I can take responsibility of that? I don't have to depend on others in that way of maybe the model of mental health has been for the last 20, 30 years. If we can listen to the story properly, we can start to actually hear what the solution might be, not because we come as an expert saying this is what you should do, but if we listen to the story properly, the solution is always in the story. The people will talk about their triumphs. They will talk about their passions. They'll talk about their aspirations. They'll also talk about their limitations. But it's in that listening to the story that you actually find what the next steps probably should be. And therefore, that coaching concept of listening to understand instead of listening to direct. Because if a person can kind of come to their own realization, oh, if I just tried this, maybe that's the way I can step forward, then they'll own it. In my work, I always talk about three or four important concepts. We need to learn how to connect with people so that we actually earn their trust and that they feel valued and they feel safe. That's part of how our brain works. If we don't feel safe with people, we don't open up. We don't really tell them the whole story of who we are. The other is the inspire part. As part of change, people need to know that it can be different. That, they may not believe it themselves, but as a coach, you're sort of saying, if you trust me enough, we'll get there. And as part of that journey, you're probably sharing your own path on some level, not at the intimate level, but some of your successes. And then the idea of building forward. I've always thought this idea that when we work with people, we should always start with what they already can do, and then you scaffold it out. And so it kind of ties into Carol Dweck's work around the growth mindset. If we help people to step out of their comfort zone and try something different and create success around that, you've actually started the rewiring of the brain. You actually help them to develop those neural pathways that are then now an experience for them. And they now have something to compare to when they weigh the pros and cons as they go forward. So in many ways, the model of coaching that you're being introduced to is really based in the neuroscience of positive change. It's about how people interpret the world around them, but if they experience it, they now have a new way or a new template to actually reinterpret the world around them, which then opens up their framework for trying different things. Everybody has a story. We are all on a life journey. And it doesn't mean your story is good or bad. It just means that's the story that you've got to this point. And as a coach, we have this amazing opportunity to come alongside and not to tell them what their story should be, but rather for them to experience the story they want. And therefore, how do we align their strengths with their aspirations?